Alright guys, so here it is. A second referendum, a people's vote, is a ridiculous idea. The reasons are many. Let me detail a few of them. No script. This is all off the cuff, so let's go with it. So first of all, the main point of why a second referendum is a stupid idea is because it sets the precedent that in future any vote or referendum or election could just be argued to be a dress rehearsal. And then after a couple of years when the rich and powerful have had time to fill your heads with lots of propaganda and scare tactics to try and reverse the decision that they did not want to happen in the first place, then you hold a second referendum and go with that vote, or a second election and go with that vote. It's a ridiculous precedent. A referendum happened. You have to respect democracy. We're leaving the EU. It has to happen. Now, thankfully, John McDonnell from Labour has come out and today said that if Labour were to back a people's vote, a second referendum, then staying in would not be on the table. It would only be a referendum on the terms of the deal. Whatever the fuck that means. You know, you've got people that have been paid every day of their working life for the last couple of years to try and manoeuvre this deal. The Tories can't do it. That's a whole other story. We'll get onto that in a minute. But a second referendum would not be a test of the general public's ability to assess the intricate details of whatever deal there is there. It would only be a test of how well the propaganda and the fear tactics have worked. And they've worked really, really well because it's been across the board. We don't have a left-wing press in Britain at the moment. We have a neoliberal press. We have The Independent and The Guardian who position themselves as left-leaning, but they are enemies of progress. They are enemies of socialism. They've spent the last 3 years trying their absolute best every day to undermine Jeremy Corbyn and to destroy his socialist vision for Labour and their chances at election. And yet now we see The Independent and The Guardian positioning themselves as friends and saying, you know, Labour, we really want you to back a second referendum and it could get you 1.5 million votes. If you back a people's referendum, a second referendum, it will get you potentially 1.5 million extra votes. Think of that. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous canard. Let me explain why. It's pretty obvious, if it hasn't occurred to you already, it's a ridiculous canard because there is currently not a general election on the table. So if a second referendum happens and Remain wins, which it probably would, if Remain was on the table, then there will be no reason for that 1.5 million people to vote Labour in the next election because they've already had their people's vote. They've already had their second election referendum. So there's no need for that extra 1.5 million who were from other parties. I don't know exactly where those voters are supposed to have come from, but according to The Independent and The Guardian, 1.5 million extra votes are on the table for Labour if they supported a second referendum. But there's no general election on the cards. So after that second referendum is held, those people have got what they wanted already. There's no reason for them to switch to Labour. So it's stupid. It's stupid for a second reason as well. Over 1/3 of Labour voters voted to leave. 1/3. I think they got 12 million votes in the last election. So what's 1/3 of 12 million? That's more than 1.5 million. Okay? So a hell of a lot more people who voted Labour have also voted Leave. And it seems to be the case that Leave voters are more vociferously willing to change party in their vote to support their decision on the referendum. We know that because of the rise of UKIP. UKIP took votes from both Tories and Labour because they had a one-track agenda, which was leaving the EU. And UKIP did really well for a while until the referendum Leave won, and then UKIP quickly became irrelevant because that goal had been achieved and those voters went back to Tory and Labour. So we know that Leave voters are more likely to change party as a result of their desire on that decision. Okay, so there's another reason. Backing a second referendum is electoral suicide for another reason as well. It hands Theresa May a massive PR boost. She can then go and say to the people, as the right-wing press is already starting to try and do, she can argue to be the one who is patriotic, is for the UK, and she's the one who respects democracy, and Corbyn does not respect democracy, and he does not respect the people of the UK and your decisions. So it's electoral suicide for them to back a second referendum. And, Corbyn, he's trying to manoeuvre. He's trying to keep everyone happy sometimes with his answers, and I don't blame him because he's had it from all angles for the last 3 years, from outside and inside his party. So I don't blame him for trying to balance things out. He's trying to be diplomatic. John McDonnell was a bit more clear in his statement that he made yesterday or today, wherever it was, when he said that, if Labour were to back a people's vote, then remaining would not be on that ballot paper. But again, calling for this referendum, it would be the Tories who write the question. So again, it's not giving you any control. It's not giving Labour any chances at the election. It's not giving them any more political clout. It's handing the Tories a PR victory. It's handing them the ability to take the high ground on respecting democracy. Imagine that. Anyway, so I did vote leave, but I kind of voted leave with the knowledge that it might get a little bit worse before it gets better, because of course, unfortunately, this half of the revolution had to happen before the second half, which is getting a socialist, democratic socialist Labour government in power. Leaving the EU and getting a socialist Labour government are two halves of the same revolution. The EU is an enemy to socialism. It enshrines capitalism into its very fabric. This is basically a quote from Tony Benn, who of course was a huge critic of the EU, and he's where I take the majority, I guess, of my EU analysis from. I agree with that dude on pretty much everything I've ever seen him talk about, and when he talks about the EU, he's on point, and I'll put a link in the low bar to one of his talks about it. But yeah, it is an enemy of socialism. It enshrines capitalism into its very fabric. It gets in the way of socialist policy in various different ways. And if you're clued up about this, I'm sure you will know the intricacies of that. But there are various factors about the EU that stifle socialist policy. And so, for Labour to really enact what they want to do and to be able to do it swiftly and effectively, it would be a lot better to be outside of the EU. Because, of course, one of the major benefits of leaving is it will make it a lot easier to renationalise all those foreign-owned public services and utilities that were sold abroad by neoliberal and neoconservative governments for the last 40 years. The French own British Water, the Germans run British buses, and many other different public services and utilities where the profits are currently going overseas. We could take all of them back and get all of those profits from all of those industries and public services and put them back into the public purse. Together with Labour's other reforms, it provides a big opportunity for Brexit. So it's no surprise that Brexit has been cast in this the debate has been cast in this xenophobic way, because we don't have a free press. We don't have any socialist press. Is it the Morning Star? There's a very small paper. Is it the Morning Star? Generally speaking, the entire British mainstream press is against socialism and does not want Corbyn. And, it's no coincidence that the very same people that have spent the last 3 years doggedly trying to destroy Corbyn's chances of election and undermine him from within the party are the very same people now arguing for a people's vote to second referendum. The very same people who spread those lies about anti-Semitism, who whipped up all those fake controversies to try and remove Corbyn, are the same people fighting for this so-called people's vote. It's not a coincidence. It's their latest and one of their biggest ways of trying to undermine this movement, because they don't want socialism. They're not socialists. They were brought in by Tony Blair, of course, who was not a socialist. He destroyed Clause 4, which is a pillar of Labour policy which committed the Labour Party to the nationalisation of public services. And he removed Clause 4, opening the door to privatisation. Blair carried on a lot of Thatcher's policies. So, the Labour Party is still infected with a hell of a lot of people who do not want that democratic socialist direction. So it's disappointing to see such a lack of analytical nous from the left on this issue, and for the debate to all be casting this about xenophobia and stuff. Like, it's not about immigration. Yes, we definitely need people to come in from other countries to work here. We simply don't have the people here to do all the jobs that need doing. I work in a care home currently, and the night staff there are almost exclusively African immigrants. I don't know how that worked out. Maybe there's just not enough people in my area that were native that want to do that job. It's not a very desirable job. Yeah, but thank God, they're lovely people, they work hard, they're great. And without them, the home would really struggle. I don't think it's the policy of the company to prefer foreign workers. It's just those are the people that have gone for those jobs. Maybe there aren't locals going for it. I don't know what that is. But the point being, that's one little example I've seen firsthand of us needing foreign workers. And that's not even on a skilled level. Of course they're still going to come here. Of course we're not going to shut the doors. The EU is not what it's cracked up to be. People have this idea of it, of this benevolent force. The EU endorsed the fascist crackdown on Catalonia by Spain recently, and we saw what happened, sending thousands of armed police in to beat up old grannies and smack people with batons just for lining up to vote. That's fascism, and the EU endorsed that. And I've seen some really hardline Remainers renege on their support for the EU over that issue. It's just one example, but yeah, it's not what it's cracked up to be. Every single economic problem that we currently have in the UK gestated whilst we were inside the EU. So how does it make sense now to see it as our one salvation? That doesn't make any sense. All of the Tory malfeasance that we have seen over the last 40 years, and New Labour, Tory Light, all of those bad policies that have got us to the situation where we are now, with all the economic problems we do have, happened whilst we were in the EU. It didn't save us from any of that Tory policy. In fact, it exacerbated it. Like I said, with this hallowed single market everybody fucking jizzes over, it facilitated the sale of public services and utilities to foreign interests. It was Tory policy, but it happened through the single market. And that's got in the way of socialist policies. So yeah, there's a reason why Corbyn hasn't endorsed, well, there's a couple of reasons why Corbyn hasn't endorsed a rejection of that referendum vote. For the start, he knows that the EU stifles socialism, but secondly, you have to respect democracy. But if you didn't like, I'm sorry you didn't like the vote result, you have to respect a democratic vote, because if you don't, if you argue for a rerun, the precedent it sets is very dangerous. Remain voters would have been beside themselves with consternation had Remain won and then Leavers managed to force a second referendum with 2 years worth of fear-mongering on Remain. If it was flipped, if the script was flipped, all you people arguing for a second referendum would be absolutely livid. You'd be having none of it. So you've got to be consistent. It took me a while to come to that decision about Leave. I do trust kind of certain political commentators, their view on things, and when you find certain people that you basically feel like you're on the complete same level with, then you get to trust their opinion. And I feel that way about Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn pretty much. Actually, there's a couple of things I do disagree with Corbyn on, so I'm no sycophant. He's wrong on self-ID currently, but he's getting some bad advice from a ridiculous trans lobby that demands a biological denialism that is quite unheard of, unprecedented. That's a whole different video. But yeah, so a second referendum is a stupid idea. It sets